It always comes down to one of the big things that I like to say is 100% security doesn't exist. Welcome to Life of a CISO. I'm Dr. Eric Cole, your host, and we'll be taking you on a journey each week on what it takes to be a CISO and what are solutions that you can implement today if you are currently a Chief Information Security Officer or if you want to be one in the future. This is Life of a CISO. Welcome to this week's episode of Life of a CISO with yours truly, Dr. Eric Cole. And it really is one of my favorite times of the week. I feel like I get to know you, right? We're hanging out together, right? Even though it's virtual, right? I'm seeing all your comments in YouTube and emails, and I appreciate all that feedback and all those positive comments that we're getting, and just love sitting down in my little studio. I invite you in every week, and we just get to talk about cybersecurity. And to me, probably one of the most overlooked areas of cybersecurity, which is thought, leadership, and strategy. When I go in and look at a lot of the books on cybersecurity, courses, methods, techniques, and the discussions out there, a lot of it is very technical and tactical focused. Now, don't get me wrong. That's important, right? If your firewall is not configured correctly, if you're not going in and having good policies in place, the probability of your organization being secure is pretty low. However, for all of this to work, somebody needs that strategy. Somebody needs to have that thought leadership where they step back, they look at that big picture, and they say, okay, what are the things that are really important to our organization? How do we build out an effective strategy? And how do you think like a Chief Information Security Officer so you can either, if you're currently a CISO, make your job even better? I know you're doing an awesome job. Or if you want to be a CISO, or if you want to support your CISO, Life of a CISO gets you inside what are the important things of thought leadership and strategically looking at an organization to support all of the great technical components and people that you have in your organization. So I always like starting with some Q&A and some questions. And one of the ones I've been getting a lot this week, both in social, in some of the virtual keynotes that I've been giving, and some of the coaching that I've been providing, is really all around this theme of, Eric, what is really the most important thing for a CISO? If there's only a few things I should look at and focus on, what are they? And to me, what it really comes down to is if you want to be an effective CISO, you need to really be obsessed with three areas, and they're all interrelated. And it's all about what is your critical data, what are the threats to that critical data, and what are the vulnerabilities that exist that would allow somebody to cause harm or damage to that critical data. That's really the strategic viewpoint of a CISO, because let's face it, what are the things that would cause significant damage to your organization? If you go in and you talk to your board of directors or your executives or your CEO, and you ask them questions, what do you worry most about from a cybersecurity perspective? What are the things that if they happened would cause significant impact to the organization? What would you say was one of the worst things you've seen in the news from a cyber breach? They all come down to organizations had vulnerabilities around their critical data, and there were threats that they didn't properly protect against. That's really the explanation if we want to drill down why our organization's getting compromised. Or the other question that's aligned with the same answer is, Eric, why is it that organizations are spending all of this time, energy, and effort on security? You see these companies that have budgets of $20 or $30 million. They have staffs of 15, 20, or 30 people, and they still have a major breach. How could that happen? How could they be going in and doing all this energy and effort and still get breached? And it really comes down quite simply. They had critical data that contained vulnerabilities, that there were threats that they were not aware of, did not address, or did not catch in a timely manner. It always comes down to one of the big things that I like to say is 100% security doesn't exist, right? As long as you have functionality and as long as you're running your business, there will always be some exposures. So the fact that a company is going to have a breach is a reality. However, the goal is timely detection. It's all about detecting and controlling the overall damage. And the damage ultimately revolves around protecting and securing your critical data. Right? One of the things I always joke with my clients and students that I coach is may all your breaches be minor, right? They're going to happen, right? But may they all be minor, small, and detected in a quick time frame. And let's just play that one out. What is the difference between a major breach and a minor breach? And it's funny because sometimes I'll get people, they think it's a trick question and they go, oh, they're the same, right? There is no difference between them, but there actually is. I mean, there actually is big breaches and small breaches, right? So let's play it out. Let's use an analogy. Is there a difference between a major car accident and a minor car accident? Well, absolutely. If you're sitting at a light this morning and somebody is on their phone, right, making a TikTok video, and yes, I actually saw that. Fortunately, they were next to me and not behind me, right? But they're like, either they're trying out some new dance moves, or I'm assuming they're TikToking out there, and they're not paying attention, and boom, they roll into the back of you. And your car jolts forward. You sort of take a deep breath, you pull over and you look, and maybe there's a little scratch or a little bump, and you take down their information and you go on your way. 15, 20-minute inconvenience, and then you got to get your car fixed, but that's a minor car accident. On the other hand, if you're going 70 miles an hour down the road and somebody sideswipes you, and your car flips over 3 times and you have to get taken to the hospital in a helicopter in your intensive care, that is clearly a major car accident. What is the difference? The impact. The impact to you, your life, and your body. And it's the same thing with cybersecurity. A minor breach is one in which minimal to no data is compromised and the attack is caught in a timely manner. A major breach is one in which millions of records are compromised. You're all over the news. You have to do a major breach disclosure, and you didn't catch that attack within a timely manner. So really, if we get down to it, the difference between a major breach and a minor breach is really the data that was compromised. But if we really pull on that string, what it really comes down to is how quickly did you detect the attack? Because if you detect an attack within 5 minutes, most likely there will be a small amount of data that was compromised and you'll be properly protected. But if you don't detect the attack for 2 or 3 years, that's when millions upon millions of records are compromised, because most attacks, they slowly take data over a long period of time. So the sooner you can detect, the better off you are. So what we're really coming down to when we're going in and talking about cybersecurity, it's not just about the threats, vulnerabilities, and data, but if we really want to put a bow on answering this question, what it really comes down to is detecting and stopping any attacks that could harm or impact your critical data in a timely manner. That's ultimately what it comes down to. But in order to do that, prevention is ideal. So we need to try to find those vulnerabilities and fix as many as we can. And detection is a must. So we need to be able to go in and detect when our data is being compromised, which we do through outbound monitoring and outbound filtering. Remember, if you didn't watch my previous episode, you definitely don't want to miss it. It's one of my favorite. Everyone is one of my favorite. This becomes my new favorite one every time I record one of these. And it really comes down to inbound prevention and outbound detection and where your gaps are in your organization. So now that we've sort of started off with that question, what I'd really like to focus in on this episode is, how does an attack occur? What is sort of the breakdown or structure of how somebody breaks in to your organization? Because that's ultimately going to go in and show us what are the threats, what are the vulnerabilities, and what is the critical data that you need to protect. Now, the way I teach this is a little different, because you hear a lot of people go, oh, Eric, every attack is unique and different. That's why signature-based solutions don't work today. And we need more behavioral analytics in order to look at the behavioral patterns, because every attack is unique and different. Yes, at a very detailed level, when you're looking at the specific exploit that's in place, you could argue that the code for exploiting a system is unique and different. And you could argue that every phishing attack, the email might be slightly different and the actual ransomware code might be altered and modified. However, we don't need to worry about that detail. If we're looking at strategy and we want to build a strategy that properly focuses in on threats and vulnerabilities, the good news is the general steps that are taken to break into an organization are all the same. So if we can understand those steps and the exposures and the vulnerabilities, we can put together an effective strategic plan for protecting the organization. So let's go in and take a look at how an attack actually works, and then we can start going into what we need to protect and secure. And the good news is I constantly monitor and track. Me and my team are always looking at the big, medium, and small data breaches that are out there. And I will tell you, they all have happened in the same way. So essentially, when you're going to go in and you're an attacker, so we're going to think like an attacker for the next 15 or 20 minutes. So as an attacker, you need a target. You need something you're going after. Well, in an organization, there's really two targets. There's a server and there's a client. Those are the two targets that somebody is going to go after. So if an attacker is going to break in to your organization, they either need to find a visible server from the internet and target and go after it, or they need to find an individual, typically an email address, and target and go after that individual. So it all starts, if we go to the top of the attack tree, it's all going to come down to picking a target of either servers or clients, and I'll cover each one of those separately. However, from a starting point, remember the general process of how an attacker works is they follow a 5-step process. They do reconnaissance, scanning, exploitation, creating backdoors, and covering their tracks. And to me, the reason why a lot of companies fail when it comes to security is because they focus in on step 3. They focus in on stopping the exploit. So they're going to go in and try to stop a system from being exploited. A lot of focus on vulnerability scanning, fixing vulnerabilities, patching systems, and those types of things. And that's not bad, and we'll get to that. And I'll show you the big areas. But the issue is they're not thinking like an adversary. The better and more you can think like the adversary, the more effective you're going to be. They're going to do reconnaissance to find targets. So the first question you need to ask is what servers are visible from the internet and what clients are visible from the internet. Because let's face it, if you have 50,000 people in your organization or you have 30,000 servers, and I tell you, one of them is going to be targeted over the next 3 weeks. Does that really help you? No. I mean, yeah, of course it is, but you don't know where to focus on and what to look at. But if I can go in and tell you that you have 4 servers that are visible from the internet and have exposures, or you have 11 users that are very, very active on the internet, giving out their names and phone numbers and others because they give presentations and they're very visible in their activity, isn't that helpful? If I go in and say there's 4 servers out of 30,000 that are going to be targeted, you could put more energy and effort against those 4 servers. And if you go in and say 11 of your 50,000 employees might be targeted, you can do additional monitoring and analytics against them. So the first thing you want to have your team look at is what are the servers that are visible from the internet at our organization, and who are the users that are very, very visible within our organization. And that's fairly easy. Once again, there's a lot of detailed ways of doing this, but the most simplest is just go in and search on your company domain name. So I go in and I search it at secure-anchor.com. And what is that going to do? That's going to show me all the email addresses that are visible from the internet, right? Because let's face it, all our emails are ecol or another variation at secure-anchor.com. So a simple starting point just to see which users are highly visible and highly active is you can go in and just do an at yourcompanydomainname.com. Just a good starting point to see what's out there. So you always want to start with that reconnaissance. You want to know what the adversary knows. One of the things I've learned over the years, and this is true in any activity, any game that you're in, and let's face it, cybersecurity is a game, and it's a fun game, right? But it's a game, is if your adversary knows more than you, you're probably going to lose. And if you look at the really good sports teams, they do their homework. They know the plays of the opponent. They know their strengths. They know their weaknesses. So to me, one of the big gaps I see with a lot of company security programs is the adversary knows more about their company than they do. The adversary knows their exposures more than they do, and therefore they're not going to have a good chance of winning. And I'll give a perfect example of this. So about 9 months ago, I get called from a client in New York City where we do a lot of work, and they say, hey, Eric, we got a call from the FBI that they were working on another case and they found all of our information and data out on the internet and said that we've been breached or compromised. I said, okay, that's common. But they asked a weird question. They said, Eric, should we believe them? Should we believe them that we've really been breached? So like, yeah, why wouldn't you believe the FBI? Right? They're not going to sit there and lie to you. So I asked, why would you ask that question? And they said, because in our data and information that was found on the internet, there was a network diagram that the adversary created of our environment. I said, okay. And they said, we compared it to our network diagram and it's completely wrong. It's completely inaccurate. So that's why we're wondering whether this is a real attack or not. So they hired us to come in, and the first thing we did is we needed to know what we're dealing with. Everything starts with an accurate, up-to-date network diagram. If you are a CISO or you work in security or do any security leadership, and you do not have an accurate network diagram of your organization, do not pass go, do not collect $200 because you don't know what you're dealing with. You don't have the visibility. So we went in because we needed to see who was right and who was wrong. We had a network diagram of the company. We had a network diagram that the adversary created, and they were both completely different. So we created an accurate, up-to-date network diagram. Now let me help you out here. If this was a school assignment, and I was grading these school assignments, the company's network diagram would have got an F. The diagram they were using to protect their organization wasn't even close to reality. It didn't even match how their network really was. And the attacker's network diagram, I would have given an A-. It was pretty darn close. So here's the scary part. The adversary that was coming in publicly had a better idea of their network than the company did. Who do you think's going to win that battle, right? Who do you think's going to win that showdown, right? And unfortunately, the attacker won, and they had a very, very significant breach that they didn't catch for multiple years. So it all comes down to having that proper visibility. So you want to make sure you do your reconnaissance just like the adversary, and you have your network diagram. You know what servers are visible from the internet, and you know what users are also visible. You want to know what your high priority targets are. You want to know if an attacker is going to come after you at a very high level, right? We haven't even gotten into the detailed vulnerabilities. Who are they going to target and who are they going to go after within your organization? So now let's go for the server. So we'll cover the server first, and then we'll go after the individual or user. Now here's the cool part. In both cases, the exposures and vulnerabilities that attackers are using are very consistent, are very regimented, and are the same. So if you just focus in on a few core key areas, you can easily get ahead of the adversary. So let's take a look. If an attacker is going to target a server, What do? They essentially find servers that are visible from the internet. Once they find servers that are visible from the internet, they're going to find ports that are open and services that are running. And the number one way, the number two way, the number three way, right? The top 5 ways they're always going to get in over the last couple of years are unpatched systems. Companies are doing a terrible job on patching their external facing systems. So the first rule, if you want to minimize or reduce your systems and your service from getting compromised, as a security strategist or a CISO, you must be obsessed with patching and updating. Now, trying to do that for all your servers can be hard, and I recognize mitigating controls. You might, I know with a lot of our banks and electrical utility companies and oil and gas clients, they have some older systems that can't be patched, that can't run the latest software because it'll impact the business. The software won't run. But in those cases, you have mitigating remediation controls. You have air gaps, you have other measures in place. So what I want you to start off with is internet-facing systems. If a system is worthy enough to be visible from the internet, it must be patched and up to date. There are no exceptions to that rule. If you're telling me that a server can't be fully patched and can't be up to date because software or legacy applications won't run, that server is not worthy of being accessible from the internet. It really is that simple. That has to be a non-negotiable. So you want to make sure that you are fully patching all your systems. Now, here's where it gets tricky. And to me, it's what I've nicknamed or called the 90% rule. If you look at any of these big companies, any of these big organizations that have had major breaches, right, they've been compromised 2 or 3 years, hundreds of millions of records. You're telling me that they're not patching? You're not telling me that they're not updating? No. They are. Here's the problem. When I go in and do investigations and I work with these clients and I assess and I help them build an effective roadmap, the problem is this: 90% of their external servers are patched. 90% of their applications are up to date. 90% of their systems are properly configured. And honestly, in some cases, it's even higher. It's 95 or 96. Here's the problem. It's not 100. And that's the issue. If 90% of your servers are fully patched, configured, and up to date, that still means 10% aren't. And if you have 100 servers, that's 10 servers that attackers can go after. So the problem that organizations are facing is they're not doing it completely. Now, I know sometimes people get confused and go, but Eric, you told us we can't patch 100% of our systems. Don't misquote me. Don't do it. I never said that. Yes, you did. No. I said you can't ever be 100% secure if you have functionality. They're completely different. If you're looking at the entire organization and you have functionality in running your business, there will be some vulnerabilities in your entire organization. That's a reality. However, if you're taking the 20 or 30 servers that are visible from the internet, you can absolutely patch 100% of them. You can absolutely make sure that 100% of them are properly configured and properly analyzed. And honestly, I would rather you spend more energy on making sure the visible systems from the internet are fully patched and up to date than trying to patch internal systems that aren't directly accessible, are air-gapped, or have other controls in place to protect, secure, and lock them down. So you need to understand, as a CISO, the number one method of attack are systems that are visible from the internet, typically on a DMZ, that aren't fully patched. Almost all of the exploits we're seeing today are all looking at unpatched systems, known vulnerabilities, and exploiting them to break in. So patching external systems is critical. The second issue is not only are they missing a patch, so that's the first, but they contain critical data. And that violates another one of my rules. Any system that's accessible from the internet should never contain critical data. Critical data must always go on the private network, and you must always do a minimum of a 3-tier environment. So the way this looks like, you have servers that are visible from the internet that are fully patched that would have your initial web page. There's no critical data. When the user requests critical data, it would go through a proxy on a middleware tier that would then go to a private network system that's not directly accessible and access that information. So you want to do a multi-tiered environment in order to do that. So the second rule is any internet-facing system never contains critical data. Now here's the cool part. I want you to have super rock-solid security, but you only have to do one of those. I'll tell you, with the breaches we've seen, the major breaches, if their systems were fully patched and up to date, at least via the current method, the attacker would not have gotten in, even if it contained critical data. On the other flip side, even if the systems weren't fully patched and they had known vulnerabilities, but they didn't contain critical data, the adversary would have got in, but they wouldn't have gotten anything. They wouldn't have gotten any critical data. So either one of those is going to get the job done. I want you to do both. I want you to do both of those. I want all your internet-facing systems to be fully patched, and I don't want any of them to contain critical data or critical information. So if you focus in on those two things, you not only are understanding the major threats that are out there today, but you're also fixing the biggest vulnerabilities that are out there. So that's sort of the first key piece when you're thinking like the adversary is on the server side. Make sure you're aware of all your internet-facing systems. Do recon, have an accurate, up-to-date network diagram. Make sure they're patched and don't contain critical data. Now let's look at the other target. The other target are your users. And what's interesting is phishing attacks are on the rise. We're seeing an increase based on the current landscape we're in right now, and they're targeting a lot of individuals. However, because they're targeting individuals and stealing small amounts of data or information, those are typically not big enough to make it onto the news. However, the vector that we're seeing a lot of is ransomware. Ransomware is mainly targeting an individual. And here's how it works. The individual gets an email that looks and seems legitimate, and it has either an embedded link or an attachment. And when the user clicks on the link or opens up the attachment, there's malicious code embedded within and infects the system and either sets up a pivot point, steals information, or launches ransomware that will go in and look at all the data the user has visibility to and encrypt all that information. Now, this one is easy and hard. It's easy in that if you want to go in and stop phishing, ransomware, and all those major attack vectors, it's pretty simple. Don't allow any emails externally coming in that have attachments or embedded links. Now, here's the problem. Companies built up bad habits. I want to ask you a question. Where in the world is it written that email was a file transfer mechanism? I have people sometimes send me 30 or 40 meg attachments, right, via email. It's sort of like, are you kidding me? Right? So we need to start putting in processes and systems in place that will go in and have a secure way to transfer files. I do not believe that we should continue to use email as a file transfer mechanism. It's just not what it was intended for. Next thing I want you to do is I want you to go in and do a cost-benefit analysis. I want you to go in and say, okay, what would be the impact to our organization if we didn't allow embedded links and attachments from unknown email addresses? So if you have clients you're dealing with or individuals you're dealing with or folks you deal with on a regular basis, you could register them as trusted. Now, that doesn't mean they can't get infected, right? But those are typically a lower percent. But if it's email addresses you've never communicated, you've never seen, anything like that, why are you allowing that into the organization? And I found that by doing that level, not blocking all links and all attachments, but blocking links and attachments from unknown, unregistered, untrustworthy email addresses you've never ever seen before, that goes a long way to stopping and protecting the attacks. Other thing, awareness of users. Now, once again, you're never going to be perfect here because you'll always have some users that are just not going to follow what you do. But having really good user awareness, phishing campaigns, and things like that to help users really understand what the threats and exposures are can also go in and minimize and reduce that threat vector. One of the other ones that I've started using, and today it works really, really well, not saying it'll be perfect, is most of the attacks we're seeing are targeted for Windows. It's not that Windows is more vulnerable. It's that Windows has a bigger install base. So in my experience, if 98% of the ransomware and the attacks out there are written for a Windows operating system, and they come in via embedded web links or email attachments, one of the things that I do, and I train my executives on, is to go in and use a non-Windows-based system. When I wake up in the morning and I do my initial pass of email, I always do it on an iPhone or an iPad. This way, if I'm not sure whether it's a legitimate customer or not, because I'll be honest with you, I sometimes get emails, hey, Eric, here's a proposal we'd like you to bid on. That could very much fit the profile of a phishing, but it could also be a legitimate request. So if I just delete those, I could lose out on business. So now, by going in and opening them on a separate device that doesn't contain critical data, such as an iPad or an iPhone, now, even if it is malicious, it won't infect my device. And here's the cool part. Even if the phish was for an iPhone and it infected my iPhone, none of my critical data resides there. It all resides on my Windows laptop that I use to run my business. So that, to me, is a very effective strategic measure, is to either give people or train people to always do a first pass of email and web surfing on a non-Windows-based device. So now in this episode of Life of a CISO, we're starting to think like the adversary. We understand the threats and the vulnerabilities. And remember, the two main targets in your organization are going to be servers and clients. With servers, make sure anything that's visible from the internet is fully patched and never contain critical data. And make sure that your endpoints, you're minimizing or reducing attachments and embedded links. And by checking on a non-Windows device or a computer that doesn't contain your critical data, reduces and minimizes the exposure. This is Dr. Eric Cole, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of Life of a CISO, and I look forward to seeing you next week.